If you want to stop letting other people provoke you, the first thing to understand is that irritation and anger are not inevitable reactions that happen to you like bad weather. They are responses you can learn to manage. When someone says something hurtful or behaves in a way that rubs you the wrong way, your mind instantly starts telling a story about that action, often exaggerating its meaning. That story becomes the fuel for your anger. If you change the story, the fuel fades. Practice noticing the inner narrative that rises in the first 2 seconds after a trigger. Is it telling you that the other person meant to harm you? Is it assuming motives you cannot know? Quietly label that narrative as a guess, not a fact, and the intensity of your emotional reaction begins to drop. Another practical shift: slow down your response by creating a breathing pause. A single, deliberate breath can change your physiology and give your thinking brain room to reassert itself. When you feel heat rising in your chest or clenching in your jaw, breathe in slowly to the count of 4 and exhale to the count of 6. Repeat this 2 or 3 times. You will feel a tiny gap open between the stimulus and your automatic reaction. Use that interval to choose your response rather than letting your reaction choose you. Set clearer expectations with yourself and others. Many conflicts begin because expectations are unspoken or unrealistic. If you expect everyone to act kindly and considerately at all times, you set yourself up for disappointment. Decide in advance what you can reasonably expect from people in different roles: colleagues, friends, acquaintances, strangers. When someone fails to meet that expectation, remind yourself that their behavior might reflect their own limitations, mood, or circumstances, not an attack on you. Lowering or clarifying unrealistic expectations reduces the number of occasions your inner alarm system goes off. Learn to separate the facts from the interpretation. Facts are neutral: a message arrived late, a comment was made, an appointment was cancelled. Interpretation is the story you tell about those facts: the message was late because they don't respect me, the comment was meant to embarrass me, the cancellation proves they don't care. Practice stating facts to yourself out loud or mentally without adding the story. Over time, this habit weakens the automatic leap to hostile interpretations and keeps your feelings more proportionate to the situation. Cultivate empathy without excusing poor behavior. When someone upsets you, try considering plausible reasons for their actions that don't involve hostile intent. They might be distracted, tired, overwhelmed, or dealing with a personal problem. Imagining alternative explanations does not mean you condone being treated badly. It simply gives you better emotional leverage. You can respond firmly without being carried away by rage. This balance allows you to protect your boundaries while remaining composed. Use language that diffuses rather than escalates. When you feel upset, the words you choose can either pour accelerant on the situation or put out the sparks. Replace accusatory statements with neutral observations and requests. Instead of saying, "You always ignore me," try, "When you didn't respond earlier, I felt left out and I need to talk about how we can communicate better." This shift takes practice because defensive impulses like to lash out, but it pays off. People respond to calm clarity far better than to hostility. Make a habit of reframing personal slights as opportunities for growth. Every time someone triggers you, view it as a chance to practice patience, assertiveness, or emotional regulation. This reframing changes the dynamic. Instead of being a victim of someone else's behavior, you become an agent of your own development. Keep a quiet internal list of the skills you want to build: staying calm under criticism, speaking firmly without anger, letting go of petty grievances, and treat each provocation as a short training session. Designate non-negotiable self-care practices that reduce baseline irritability. Sleep, nutrition, movement, and time away from screens all influence how easily you get upset. When you're sleep-deprived, hungry, overstimulated, or running on caffeine, your tolerance for annoyances drops dramatically. Prioritize small daily rituals like a consistent sleep schedule, a short walk during the day, and a brief evening wind-down that removes digital noise. These rituals don't eliminate all sources of provocation, but they shore up your resilience so minor annoyances don't feel like major assaults. Learn to laugh at small offenses. Humor is a powerful emotional regulator. When you can see the absurdity in a minor inconvenience, the sting dissolves. This doesn't mean pretending everything is fine when it's not, but allowing yourself to notice the ridiculousness of pettiness or poor timing. A light, wry internal comment can deflate anger before it balloons. Cultivating a gentle sense of amusement about life's small disruptions makes you less vulnerable to constant irritation. Create thoughtful boundaries and communicate them calmly. If someone's behavior crosses your limits, it's perfectly healthy to say so. The crucial element is how you communicate. Before addressing a boundary issue, calm your body with breath, then state the behavior you observed, the impact it had on you, and the specific change you'd like to see. Keep the tone steady and the message short. People are far more likely to respect a boundary that is conveyed with composure than one delivered in a flare of rage. Practice strategic disengagement. Not every slight demands a response. Sometimes the smartest move is to step back and conserve your energy. When you sense tension rising and the stakes are low, allow yourself to withdraw politely and return to the matter later when emotions have cooled. Saying, "I need a moment to think about this," gives you permission to collect your thoughts and prevents you from saying something you'll regret. Strategic disengagement is not avoidance, it's emotional hygiene. Build a daily habit of reflective journaling that tracks triggers and your responses. Spend a few minutes each evening noting the moments that irritated you, what you thought in that moment, what you did, and whether the outcome matched your intention. Over time, patterns emerge. The same kinds of remarks or situations provoke you, the same thoughts ignite you, and the same responses fail to produce the outcomes you want. Armed with this insight, you can design targeted changes, different thoughts to practice, phrases to use, or boundaries to set, that gradually transform your reactivity. Adopt a mindset of tiny experiments. Instead of demanding immediate mastery over your emotions, run low-stakes experiments. Try a new response in a minor situation and observe what happens. Did taking a breath change your reaction? Did stating a calm boundary reduce conflict? Keep what works and iterate on what doesn't. This experimental attitude removes the pressure to be perfect and turns emotional regulation into a curious, results-oriented process. Recognize the power of identity change. How you think about yourself matters. If you identify as someone who gets easily angered, you will notice and interpret events in ways that confirm that label. Try adopting a new self-description: "I am someone who communicates calmly and controls my temper." Act in small ways that align with that identity, take a pause, choose neutral language, step back when needed, and the identity gradually consolidates. Repetition of small acts reinforces a new self-image that supports your long-term behavior. When needed, seek support from trusted people. You do not have to fix everything internally. Talking through a recurring trigger with a friend or mentor can clarify whether your reaction is proportionate and reveal blind spots you miss when you're inside the moment. Choose someone who listens without taking sides and who can offer perspective rather than fueling your outrage. Outside perspectives often reveal simple adjustments that make a big difference. Finally, remember that letting go of small grievances is not weakness, it is strength. Holding on to anger drains your energy, distracts you from meaningful goals, and shapes your days around the behaviors of others. Each moment you choose calm over fury is a moment reclaimed for your own life. With practice, the gap between stimulus and response widens, you feel less controlled by other people's actions, and you move through the world with more ease and purpose. If you ever need a short audio reminder for the breathing technique or a sample script to use when setting a boundary, I can craft concise lines you can copy into your workflow. Momentum audiobooks often feature similar practical, repeatable advice presented in a calm, encouraging tone, and you can rely on that kind of steady guidance to reinforce these habits daily. Continue your work on emotional mastery by sharpening awareness of the physical signs that precede anger. Often the body reacts before the mind fully understands the situation. Heat flushes the face, muscles tense, breathing becomes shallow, or a tightness forms in the throat. These somatic cues are valuable signals, not threats. When you learn to notice them early, you create a window to intervene. Pause and name the sensation quietly to yourself, for example, tight chest, or clenched jaw. Naming reduces the unconscious charge of the feeling and helps your rational mind step in. Over time, this simple act becomes an automatic brake that prevents escalation. Practice micro-interruptions that reset your nervous system. A micro-interruption can be as brief as pressing your thumb to your palm, shifting your weight, or taking a single long exhale. The goal is not to escape the moment but to nudge your body into a slightly different state so your emotions lose some momentum. These small changes interrupt habitual reaction loops and make space for choice. Like any habit, micro-interruptions require repetition before they reliably outpace the old reflex. Refine the language you use in private self-talk. People who remain calm tend to have internal dialogues that are precise and pragmatic rather than accusatory or catastrophic. Replace sweeping absolutes such as, "he always disrespects me," with specific, verifiable observations like, "he did not respond to my message this morning." Swap future-predicting phrases like, "this will ruin everything," for more neutral statements like, "this is inconvenient right now." The tone of your inner voice sets the temperature of your emotional landscape. A steady, measured inner commentator lowers the likelihood of explosive outer reactions. Create a short toolkit of go-to phrases for emotionally charged conversations. When someone pushes your buttons, having a few practiced lines reduces the cognitive load and prevents impulsive remarks. Use phrases that slow the interaction and invite clarity. "Help me understand what you meant by that," "I'm feeling upset and want to talk when we're both calm," or "I need a minute to collect my thoughts." These kinds of statements redirect the exchange from blame to mutual problem-solving and signal that you intend to stay composed rather than escalate. Separate urgency from importance. Many triggers feel urgent because they demand an immediate emotional reaction, but most are low in real consequence. Ask yourself whether the issue matters a year from now or if it only matters in the moment. This framing helps you allocate your emotional energy wisely. When you recognize that a perceived attack is low stakes, you can respond with proportionality, address what needs addressing and let the rest go. Train your conversational curiosity. When people hurt you, a natural tendency is to interpret their behavior as an affront and respond defensively. Instead, practice asking questions that reveal context. "Were you aware of how that sounded?" or "What was going on for you when you said that?" Curiosity shifts the interaction from confrontation to inquiry, which reduces the heat and increases the odds of resolution. It also gives you more information to decide whether the behavior was a misunderstanding, a pattern, or something that truly requires a boundary. Use role rehearsal to prepare for predictable triggers. If certain people or situations reliably provoke you, mentally rehearse how you will respond in advance. Imagine the scene, the likely words, your physical sensations, and then practice your chosen response until it feels natural. Rehearsal reduces surprise and strengthens the neural pathways for calm behavior. This preparation can be brief, a few minutes before a meeting or a commute, yet it dramatically improves performance under pressure. Balance compassion for others with fierce protection of your own well-being. Many people tolerate repeated disrespect because they fear conflict or feel responsible for other people's emotions. Compassion is valuable, but it must not come at the expense of your dignity. Learn to give without losing yourself. When someone's pattern of behavior undermines you, respond firmly and clearly rather than swallowing resentment. Firmness communicates your worth without inflaming the situation. It's a form of respect for both parties. Notice the stories that keep you stuck in irritation, especially those tied to personal history. If past hurts or recurring themes in your life are fueling disproportionate responses, they deserve attention. Reflect on whether a present reaction echoes an old wound. If it does, treat the current moment partly as information about unresolved material rather than only about the present person's intent. This perspective allows you to address the present issue while also taking steps to heal the underlying pattern so future triggers lose their power. Practice selective disclosure of your internal experience. Not every feeling needs to be shared, and oversharing in the heat of the moment often escalates conflict. Choose the time and tone for expressing vulnerability. When you explain how something affected you, do so after you've calmed and chosen words that are specific and constructive. This increases the chance that others will hear you without becoming defensive, and it protects your emotional sovereignty while fostering meaningful communication. Invest in regular practices that cultivate equanimity. Meditation, breathwork, walking in nature, or contemplative reading are not escapes but training grounds for a steady mind. Consistent practice builds a baseline of calm so that provocations are less likely to tip you into reactivity. Even short daily routines compound over weeks and months, producing measurable improvements in patience and perspective. Make amends quickly when you do lose your temper. Even with strong practices, you will sometimes react poorly. When that happens, acknowledge the mistake promptly, apologize concisely, explain briefly without deflecting, and state how you will handle it differently next time. Swift, sincere repair prevents resentment from taking root and demonstrates accountability. It also shortens the learning loop so you can return to practicing calm in everyday life. Use comparisons to reframe perceived slights. Instead of magnifying a single negative interaction, contrast it with the full context of your relationships and achievements. This broader view often reveals that a small offense is an outlier rather than a pattern. Perspective reduces the urge to dwell on the slight and increases gratitude for what is working well in your life. Create gentle personal rituals to decompress after tense exchanges. A short walk, a soothing beverage, journaling a single line about what you learned, or a 5-minute breathing sequence can reset your mood and prevent ruminating. These rituals acknowledge that conflict has emotional residue and offer a structured way to release it without replaying or amplifying it. Monitor the role of identity threats in your reactions. Many outbursts are less about the external act and more about a perceived threat to how we see ourselves. If a remark feels like an attack on your competence, intelligence, or status, pause and ask whether the comment truly undermines you or if it's triggering an old fear of not being enough. Reaffirm your competence privately and respond from that grounded place rather than from a defensive posture. Experiment with time-limited conversations when a topic provokes strong emotions. Set a clear expectation, decide with the other person to discuss the subject for a fixed interval, perhaps 10 minutes, after which you'll pause and revisit later. Time limits prevent escalation, keep exchanges focused, and allow both parties to return with clearer heads. This technique communicates that you value resolution but not at the cost of composure. When someone repeatedly triggers you and refuses to change, accept that disengaging may be the healthiest option. Not all relationships can be repaired, and sometimes the most peaceful choice is to reduce contact, adjust expectations, or end the association. This is not defeat, it is a deliberate act of self-care that preserves your emotional resources for people who contribute positively to your life. Finally, integrate these skills gradually and with compassion for your own limits. Emotional mastery is a lifelong process, not an instant achievement. Celebrate small victories, a conversation you handled calmly, a boundary you set clearly, a day you let go of an annoyance. Each success is a proof point that steady progress is possible. If you want concrete short scripts to practice or audio prompts to cue breathing and calm phrasing, I can prepare those in a format ready to paste into your voice workflow. Momentum Audiobook style reminders can be helpful anchors for daily practice and repeated exposure, reinforcing the habits that make composure the default. Keep widening the space between stimulus and response by training your attention to the present moment. Most reactive patterns feed on a mind that is already half inside the future or the past, replaying old hurts, imagining worst-case outcomes, or rehearsing sharp replies. Grounding yourself in the senses short-circuits that cascade. Notice 3 things you can see, 2 things you can hear, and 1 thing you can feel under your feet. This simple reorientation reclaims your nervous system from spiraling narratives and returns you to a neutral platform where choice is possible again. Over time, these micro-returns to the present become an automatic corrective whenever your mind begins to manufacture grievance. Refine what forgiveness actually means for you. Forgiveness is not a demand to forget, an instruction to reconcile, or a reason to tolerate repeat offenses. It is an internal decision to release the habit of rumination and the desire for punitive satisfaction. When you forgive, you free yourself from the emotional debt owed by the other person. This does not require a grand gesture or even informing the other person. You can forgive quietly, keep your boundaries intact, and still remove the corrosive energy that anger pours into your life. Practicing forgiveness as a private act of self-liberation helps you move forward without condoning harmful behavior. Work on calibrating your moral expectations. People often assume that when someone acts selfishly or thoughtlessly, they are violating a fixed moral code. In reality, moral reasoning varies with context, culture, and energy levels. Recognizing this nuance reduces the tendency to moralize every slight and convert it into a personal indictment. When you stop treating every lapse as an ethical catastrophe, you can conserve moral outrage for issues that truly require it and avoid blowing small slights into identity-level threats. Strengthen your capacity for assertive no without guilt. Many resentments grow because we consistently say yes to things that drain us. Practicing concise refusals builds internal clarity and prevents the slow accumulation of frustration. It is not necessary to defend every refusal with a long explanation. A calm, short refusal is sufficient and often earns more respect than a defensive justification. Over time, routinely protecting your time and limits reduces the frequency of provocations and increases your sense of agency. Train yourself to recognize projection in others and in yourself. Projection occurs when someone attributes their own emotions or motives onto another person. If someone acts accusatory or hostile, consider whether their conduct reveals more about their inner state than about your behavior. Similarly, notice when you project past grievances onto new situations. Naming projection when it appears, silently and compassionately, reduces its capacity to inflame an exchange. Awareness of projection adds a layer of psychological clarity that keeps you from taking on other people's internal chaos. Develop a habit of brief mental rehearsal after every difficult interaction. Instead of replaying the scene with shame or indignation, mentally review it with curiosity and problem-solving mindset. Ask what went well, what you could shift next time, and what boundary you might reinforce. This short, structured debrief prevents rumination and converts emotional energy into practical learning, making each friction point a source of incremental growth rather than a wound that festers. Pay attention to the timing of difficult conversations. Emotional energy follows natural rhythms during the day. If someone is tired, hungry, or dealing with a stressful deadline, bringing up sensitive topics in that window is likely to produce defensiveness and a poor outcome. When possible, arrange to talk when both parties are rested and able to engage. Framing a conversation as something you want to resolve constructively sets the tone and often reduces the instinct to attack. Timing is not a moral absolute, but it is a pragmatic lever that shapes whether a discussion becomes productive or adversarial. Practice mutual accountability with people you care about. In relationships where reciprocity is possible, create a shared pact to call each other back when either party becomes reactive. Agree on a simple signal or phrase that means, "Let's pause and return when we're calmer." This mutual compact removes the drama of being caught in someone else's trigger and transforms hard moments into opportunities for teamwork. When both sides take responsibility for the tone of the exchange, trust deepens and the frequency of angry episodes declines. Keep refining what you expect from apologies. A genuine apology includes acknowledgement of harm, a brief expression of regret, and a commitment to change. Beware of apologies that are performative, deflective, or laced with qualifiers. When someone offers an apology, evaluate whether it includes those elements rather than whether it satisfies your immediate desire for vindication. Accepting an apology does not obligate you to immediate reconciliation. You can accept the apology while observing boundaries and watching for consistent change. Practice emotional economy by choosing where to invest your outrage. Not all injustices are created equal, and unlimited anger becomes combustible rather than catalytic. Use your emotional energy like a finite resource, direct it toward issues where your action can alter outcomes or where your moral conviction truly demands it. Let smaller slights dissipate so you can show up with clarity and strength for what matters most. This selective allocation of emotional resources increases your impact and reduces the wear of chronic agitation. Build empathy for the harder version of people who sometimes upset you. Most people oscillate between their best and their worst selves depending on circumstances you might not see. Holding a compassionate stance toward the less mature parts of others does not mean accepting abuse or pattern behavior, but it can soften immediate hostility and allow for clearer decision-making. When you can see the vulnerability beneath a harsh remark, you are less likely to be hijacked by rage and more likely to choose a response that both protects you and opens a path forward. Practice saying what you need in concise, non-judgmental language after you have calmed. Long, emotionally driven explanations are rarely persuasive in heated moments. Short statements of need and boundary, delivered from a place of calm, are more effective and easier to remember. Rehearse these lines silently when you are not angry so they become available when you need them. This preparation reduces the chance of reactive blurting and increases the likelihood that your words will land with clarity rather than defensiveness. Keep an inventory of triggers that stem from specific relationship dynamics. Different relationships provoke different responses. A parent may trigger old shame, a colleague may trigger fears of incompetence, a partner may trigger deep attachment worries. Mapping which relationships activate which wounds helps you craft tailored strategies for those interactions. With that map, you can pre-plan responses, set boundaries, and choose engagement levels that preserve your peace while maintaining necessary connections. Learn to translate anger into clear action when appropriate. Anger can be a useful signal that something needs changing. Instead of allowing anger to fester or to explode, translate it into an actionable item, schedule a conversation, withdraw for a boundary, or change the conditions that enable the behavior. Action channels the energy of anger into constructive outcomes and removes the lingering bitterness that passive fury creates. Finally, maintain humility about your own blind spots. You will not be perfect at emotional regulation, and you will sometimes hurt others despite your best efforts. When you misstep, own it quickly and learn. When others hurt you, respond with calibrated firmness and the intention to preserve your dignity without consuming your day. Over the long run, this blend of self-honesty, practiced calm, and strategic action builds a life where your emotional center is not at the mercy of passing provocations. If you want, I can craft precise one-sentence prompts to use as on-the-spot reminders during anxious moments or produce a short audio clip that cues the breathing pattern and a calming phrase. These ready-made prompts can be pasted directly into a voiceover generator to create small anchors you can replay when you need them most. Momentum audiobook-style prompts tend to be concise and steady, offering repeated exposure to ideas that make emotional habits more durable. Develop deeper patience by learning to treat provocation as data rather than drama. When someone says something sharp, observe the event with the curiosity of a scientist. What exactly happened, what were the contributing factors, and what are the possible interpretations? This methodical approach converts emotional reactivity into information gathering and reduces the instinct to retaliate. Over time, you will find that viewing conflict through the lens of curiosity preserves your energy and increases your capacity to respond wisely. Strengthen your capacity to tolerate ambiguity. Many bursts of anger come from a desire for immediate clarity about people's motives and intentions. When others act in ways that feel hostile or dismissive, resist the urge to resolve the mystery instantly. Allow uncertainty to exist for a while and collect more data before assigning meaning. This patience reduces misinterpretation and prevents you from manufacturing reasons to become upset. Practice brief self-soothing rituals you can perform anywhere. These rituals should be subtle and portable, pressing 2 fingers together, drinking a sip of water slowly, or consciously relaxing your shoulders. The specific act is less important than the consistent association between that act and a calming intent. Over time the ritual acts as a cue to your nervous system that you are choosing steadiness over reactivity, and it becomes a rapid de-escalation tool. Build a vocabulary for subtle emotional states. Anger is often a compound of disappointment, fear, hurt, and irritation. When you learn to name the specific ingredient, disappointment instead of generalized fury, you gain more precise access to what needs changing. Naming makes the emotion smaller and more manageable and helps you choose a response that addresses the root cause rather than simply venting. Use constraints to manage provocative conversations. If a topic reliably inflames you, set a clear structure for discussing it, limit the time, state the purpose, and outline the desired outcome. Structural constraints reduce the likelihood that the exchange will spiral into personal attacks. When both sides agree to a format, the conversation becomes a project to solve rather than a battlefield to win. Rehearse graceful exits from conversations that are going nowhere. It is productive to plan simple, uncharged phrases that allow you to step away, state that you need time to think, propose returning to the matter later, or suggest continuing the discussion with a mediator present. These graceful exits preserve relationships while protecting your composure and make it easier to choose strategic disengagement without guilt. Practice acknowledging the valid parts of another person's perspective before expressing your own. This technique, often experienced as disarming, does not mean conceding the point, it means recognizing reality in a way that lowers defensive walls. A brief acknowledgement, recognizing stress they might be under or the constraints they face, can shift the tone of an exchange dramatically and open space for calmer problem solving. Develop a habit of pausing before writing or sending messages that might be inflammatory. Text and email magnify misunderstandings because they lack tone and immediate feedback. Before hitting send, read your message aloud, remove any phrases that sound like accusations, and ask whether the note would be helpful in resolving the issue. This simple discipline reduces regret and helps keep relationships intact. Create accountability rituals that involve a trusted friend or mentor. When you are trying to change reactivity patterns, having someone you can debrief with provides perspective and reality testing. Choose a person who can listen without taking sides and who will offer honest, non-violent feedback. Regularly reviewing challenging interactions with this ally accelerates learning and keeps progress steady. Train your eye for recurring triggers in your working environment. Is it a particular colleague's tone, a way meetings are structured, or the timing of feedback that creates friction? When you can identify environmental patterns, you can change the conditions rather than relying solely on inner work. Small external adjustments, different meeting formats, written pre-reads, or clearer agendas, can substantially reduce the frequency of provocations. Practice small acts of generosity toward people who irritate you without ignoring their behavior when it matters. Offering a brief, friendly gesture lowers the temperature and models the behavior you want to see. Generosity is not a tool for manipulation, it is a habit that inoculates you against bitterness and makes it easier to choose calm when provoked. Learn to use sleep and rest as preventive measures for reactivity. Chronic sleep debt amplifies negative emotional responses and shrinks your capacity to tolerate stress. Prioritize restorative rest and integrate short restorative breaks into high-stress days. Even a 10-minute pause away from stimuli can reduce reactivity and improve decision-making. Practice noticing when you are seeking moral vindication rather than a solution. Some conflicts are driven by the desire to prove you were right rather than to improve the situation. When noticing that impulse, pause and ask whether winning the argument will actually improve the relationship or the circumstances. Redirect energy toward problem solving and connection rather than validation. Strengthen your response options by expanding your emotional repertoire. Calm, curiosity, firm boundary, and disengagement are different skills that suit different situations. Practice each in low-stakes environments so they become available when stakes rise. The more options you have, the less likely you are to default into anger. Use phrasing that separates behavior from identity. When describing a problem, focus on the action rather than attacking the person's character. Saying someone's action was hurtful preserves their dignity and increases the chance of a constructive response, while attacking identity escalates conflicts and deepens resentment. Create a short daily ritual to consolidate gains, reflect on one moment you handled better, note what you did differently, and commit to practicing one small skill the next day. This ritual amplifies progress through repetition and reframes setbacks as temporary rather than definitive. Practice radical responsibility for your part in conflict without accepting disproportionate blame. Recognize what you contributed to a tense exchange, own it, and then clearly state what you expect moving forward. Taking responsibility reduces defensiveness in others and models the constructive behavior you want to cultivate. When you feel overwhelmed by anger's intensity, use brief cognitive techniques to reduce its charge. Remind yourself that feelings are transient and that the urge to act on them will pass. Mentally shift to a future-oriented image of how you want to feel after the interaction, composed, respected, and in control, and let that image guide your behavior. Develop a compassionate inner coach who offers steady reminders rather than punitive self-talk. Replace self-criticism with practical coaching language, note the trigger, validate the difficulty, and suggest the next small action. This internal ally encourages consistency and reduces the shame spiral that often inflames anger. Integrate movement into your strategy for managing irritability. Physical activity releases tension and recalibrates emotional arousal. When triggers pile up, a brisk walk, a few minutes of stretching, or short aerobic bursts can dissipate agitation and restore clarity. Finally, see every interpersonal difficulty as an opportunity to refine your social technologies, the small conversational skills, timing choices, and boundary-setting habits that allow you to live with less turbulence. Over time, these deliberate changes reduce the number of moments that upset you and make the ones that do occur far less disruptive. If you want on-the-spot one-line prompts or short audio cues to guide breathing and phrasing during tense moments, I can prepare those for easy paste into voiceover generation. Momentum Audiobook style anchors often reinforce tiny daily practices that compound into lasting calm. Practice building compassionate clarity in moments of confrontation by stating the observable facts, the effect they had on you, and a calm request for change. When you keep your statement structured and unemotional, you remove ambiguity and make it easier for the other person to hear you. For example, note the specific action, describe how it impacted your work or feelings, and suggest a simple next step that would prevent repetition. This format reduces the mental load of improvising under pressure and increases the chance that the conversation will move toward resolution rather than devolving into blame. Train your tolerance for small frustrations by deliberately exposing yourself to mild annoyances in controlled ways and practicing neutral responses. Choose low-stakes settings to practice: a delayed train, a minor service error, or a misunderstanding with a casual acquaintance. Treat these moments as rehearsals, notice the impulse to escalate, take a breath, and choose a composed response. Over time, the nervous system learns that these disruptions are survivable and that calm produces better outcomes than anger. The repeated practice rewires habitual reactions so that everyday irritations no longer trigger disproportionate fury. Refine your use of questions during tense exchanges so they invite information rather than accusation. Questions framed to learn tend to diffuse defensiveness. Ask what happened, what the speaker meant, or what constraints they were under. These inquiry-driven prompts change the shape of the interaction from adversarial to collaborative. When people feel understood, they relax and are more likely to engage in problem-solving. Curiosity therefore operates as a practical tool for reducing agitation and fostering clarity. Practice writing short, neutral summaries of contentious interactions after they occur. A concise paragraph noting the facts, the perceived intent, your emotional reaction, and the action you plan next helps to organize your thinking and cut through rumination. This ritual shifts energy from repetitive complaining to constructive planning and gives you a clear reference for future follow-ups. The act of summarizing itself often reduces emotional intensity because it invites perspective and time to process. Tune your response to the other person's capacity. Some people can engage in difficult discussions immediately and rationally, others cannot. When possible, assess whether your counterpart can tolerate direct feedback at that moment. If they cannot, choose to table the issue until both of you can give it adequate attention. This decision is strategic rather than submissive. It preserves the possibility of a productive outcome and protects you from needless escalation in emotionally unsafe moments. Keep practicing brief, composed corrective statements that preserve your dignity and the other person's autonomy. Phrases that state boundaries in a calm voice, stopping an action, moving a conversation offline, or requesting a pause, are powerful because they set limits without demeaning the other person. Repeatedly exercising this muscle builds confidence and reduces the temptation to respond with anger. A calm corrective moves the interaction toward repair rather than retaliation. Notice how your mental models of fairness shape your anger. Often, rage arises from the perception that an exchange violated an implicit rule about how people should behave. When you examine these models, you may find they contain unrealistic expectations or cultural baggage that do not apply universally. Revising your fairness assumptions to be more descriptive than prescriptive, seeing how people actually behave rather than how you think they should, reduces the frequency of moral outrage and frees energy for issues that legitimately require moral response. Practice the discipline of scheduled grievance processing. Instead of letting every slight lodge in your mind all day, give yourself a brief, dedicated window each evening to review and process grievances. During this set time, reflect on what happened, what you can learn, and whether any action is required. Limiting grievance time reduces constant rumination and trains your mind to contain negative emotional processing to manageable bounds. When you are preparing for a difficult conversation, use a short internal script that centers you, a one-sentence reminder of your desired outcome, a calming cue such as a slow breath, and a brief rehearsal of the boundary you intend to assert. This internal triad primes your nervous system, clarifies your priorities, and reduces the chance that surprise or provocation will hijack your behavior. Repetition of the script before predictably challenging encounters makes composed responses more likely. Cultivate gratitude practices that are specific and active. Gratitude is not meant to invalidate legitimate concerns but to broaden your emotional field so minor provocations do not dominate your attention. Each day, note 2 specific things that went well, why they mattered, and how they support your goals. This habit builds emotional reserves that buffer against the draining effect of repeated irritations and helps you respond from abundance rather than scarcity. Practice standing in a future perspective when a small slight feels overwhelming. Imagine how you will view the incident in 6 months or a year. Often the heat of the moment collapses when you consider the long arc of your life, relationships, and projects. This temporal shift does not minimize important problems but helps you allocate emotional energy in proportion to long-term importance rather than ephemeral discomfort. Learn to translate resentment into concrete problem-solving steps. If a person or system repeatedly disappoints you, identify specific changes that would alleviate the problem and either propose them or implement them where you can. Turning frustration into action reduces the corrosive effect of passive anger and gives you agency. Action also clarifies whether the issue is solvable or whether the healthiest route is to disengage. Hone your capacity to be present and calm in the face of judgment or criticism. When someone judges you, pause and ask whether the critique is useful and whether a meaningful change is possible. If it is, extract the practical elements and plan an adjustment. If not, let the judgment fall away. This pragmatic stance prevents defensiveness from ballooning into anger and preserves your focus on growth rather than vindication. When pattern-level problems surface, address them with clear proposals for change rather than rehashed grievances. Repetition without solution breeds resentment. Prepare a short plan that outlines the problem, the behavior you want changed, and practical steps that both parties can take. Proposing a path forward moves the dynamic from accusation to collaboration, and it limits the emotional loop that keeps you stuck. Pay attention to how you narrate other people's motives. Jumping to malicious intent is often an automatic habit that fuels anger. Practice offering alternative, benign explanations first. When you adopt a charitable first interpretation, you reduce the probability that every slight becomes a personal assault. Over time, generous framing becomes a natural filter that lowers the incidence of reactive outbursts. Build small, reciprocal rituals that repair tension quickly. After a heated exchange, a short, calm gesture, a measured apology, a clarifying sentence, or an offer to discuss logistics, can prevent a single conflict from calcifying into long-term estrangement. These micro-repairs require courage to initiate but are often the fastest route to restoring equilibrium. Finally, remind yourself that the goal is not to become passive or indifferent but to increase your capacity to respond effectively. Composure is a strategic asset. It makes your communication clearer, preserves your energy, and increases your influence. By practicing the skills above with patience and persistence, you will find that provocations lose volume and meaning, allowing you to live with more focus and less reactivity. If you would like, I can create short, attention-grabbing one-liners and audio-ready cues formatted for voiceover use that reinforce these techniques and help maintain engagement and watch time for your YouTube videos. Momentum audiobook style cues tend to be concise, steady, and repeatable, which is exactly what helps listeners build better habits over time. Begin by deepening your awareness of the small decisions that shape your day. Anger often accumulates not from one big event but from countless tiny choices, answering messages immediately with emotion, replaying a slight while you brush your teeth, allowing small irritations to stack until they feel insurmountable. Interrupt that build-up by inserting tiny pauses between stimulus and response throughout your routine. A deliberate breath before replying to a text, a 5-second look out the window before reacting to a comment, or a short walking break between meetings all reduce the kinetic energy of irritation and keep your responses proportional to the moment. Next, treat criticism as information rather than ammunition. When someone criticizes you, your first reflex may be to defend, deflect, or retaliate. Instead, ask yourself what useful data the comment provides. Is there a kernel of truth you can use to improve, or is the remark reflecting the other person's frustrations? Extract what matters and discard the rest. This conversion of potential anger into actionable insight transforms unpleasant input into fuel for growth rather than fuel for resentment. Practice naming the precise emotion behind your initial surge. Anger is often a cover for feelings that are more vulnerable: embarrassment, disappointment, fear, or helplessness. When you can identify that the sharp reaction is actually shame about a perceived failure or fear of being dismissed, you can choose a response that addresses the underlying need. Saying to yourself, "I feel embarrassed right now," or "I'm afraid of being judged," reduces the volume of the anger and makes your next action more skillful. Revisit how you use time as a boundary. Many conflicts erupt when people feel their time is not respected. Protecting your schedule calmly prevents small slights from accumulating into rage. Set and communicate clear limits around responsiveness, meeting lengths, and availability. When others push against those limits, respond with a steady restatement of your boundaries rather than escalating. Time boundaries preserve your capacity to respond thoughtfully and decrease the friction created by unmanaged expectations. Adopt a 3-step mental protocol for heated moments: label, breathe, choose. First, label the experience simply and specifically: tightness in chest, sudden heat, rush to reply. Second, take one long breath that is slightly longer on the exhale to engage the parasympathetic system. Third, choose the behavior that best serves your long-term goals rather than the immediate impulse. Practicing this protocol turns it into a reflex that outcompetes the old pattern of immediate reactivity. Pay attention to the narratives you tell about other people's growth. If you assume people should know better or ought to be different, you set yourself up for chronic irritation. Replace that rigid expectation with a curiosity about where they are in their process. Consider what constraints they face, what habits they bring into the interaction, and how realistic your timeline for their change is. Softening your expectations where reasonable reduces the frequency of offense and preserves your energy for relationships where change is possible. Create a short ritual for closing the day that clears residual grudges. Before bed, spend a minute acknowledging any moments that upset you and decide on one small constructive step for each: a future boundary to set, a phrase to rehearse, or a brief clarification to send tomorrow. Then create a physical or symbolic action that marks the end of the grievance time: a small stretch, a wash of your hands, or a quick walk to the window. That act signals to your brain that the day's emotional ledger has been balanced and that rumination need not continue into the night. Train your voice to hold calm even when your heart doesn't. Tone shapes conversations as much as words do. Practice speaking a corrective sentence quietly and slowly so your voice models the calm you want to embody. When you hold steady vocal cadences under provocation, you decrease the likelihood that others will match your intensity. This technique is practical for in-person talks and essential for creating persuasive, composed audio for your content. Use visualization to reduce escalation before predictably stressful interactions. Picture the upcoming scene in neutral detail, imagine yourself noticing the early bodily cues, and see yourself taking the small pause and choosing a composed phrase. Visual rehearsal makes the desired response familiar and decreases the shock when the moment actually happens. This approach is a form of mental training that primes your system to respond rather than react. Practice a habit of public humility when you are in positions of influence. Leaders and creators often receive outsized responses because their words are amplified. Modeling calm and quick repair when you err reduces the emotional temperature of your community. A concise acknowledgement of mistake and a clear next step for improvement prevents prolonged backlash and demonstrates that dignity and accountability coexist. Curate the media and conversational diet that fuels your emotional baseline. Continuous exposure to outraged voices, sensational headlines, or aggressive interpersonal drama raises your internal arousal and lowers your threshold for being provoked. Choose content that strengthens patience, thoughtful analysis, measured interviews, and materials that model composed dialogue. Reducing ambient anger in your informational environment makes it easier to stay composed in personal encounters. When you catch yourself rehearsing a sharp comeback, postpone the rehearsal and write the intended idea down instead. The act of writing releases mental pressure and converts a potentially combustible thought into a physical artifact you can return to later. Often, once the thought is externalized, the emotional heat dissipates and you can reevaluate whether the message serves your goals. If it does, you can craft it with care rather than under the sway of adrenaline. Practice asking for a cooling-off period explicitly and respectfully when exchanges run hot. Saying, "I want to talk about this, but I need 20 minutes to think first," models self-control and preserves the chance for a productive conversation. When both parties agree to pause, the interaction is more likely to resume with clarity and fewer accusations. This small negotiated respite prevents words blown up in haste from leaving lasting damage. Create a short inventory of the most common triggers and pair each with a modest, practiced response. Keep this inventory brief, no more than 5 items, and rehearse the responses until they feel automatic. The goal is not to memorize long scripts but to have a few reliable, calm moves that reduce the need for improvisation under stress. Make a habit of small restorative acts after tense meetings or difficult conversations, a brief walk, a favorite song, or a warm beverage. These rituals reset your nervous system and prevent residual irritation from seeping into your next interaction or your sleep. Treat these acts as preventive maintenance for your emotional well-being rather than indulgences. Finally, cultivate the patient pleasure of slow progress. Emotional composure accumulates through repetition, small failures, and tiny recoveries that teach you what works. Celebrate the moments you paused, breathed, or chose a clear boundary. Keep refining and simplifying your toolkit so it's usable under pressure. With steady practice, what once felt like constant provocation becomes a series of manageable moments, and you find more space to create, connect, and lead with clarity. Keep widening your capacity for calm by practicing intentional curiosity in the heat of an interaction. When a remark triggers you, pause and ask one simple question inwardly: what is the most likely, non-malicious explanation for this behavior? Treat the moment as an invitation to gather information rather than as evidence of a personal attack. This tiny cognitive pivot reduces the rush to moralize and opens space for a measured response. Over time, curiosity becomes a habit that weakens the reflex to retaliate and strengthens your ability to respond with clarity and purpose. Train yourself to notice escalation loops early and to step out of them deliberately. Escalation often follows a predictable rhythm: a sharp word, a defensive retort, a louder reply, and then mutual amplification. Once you recognize the pattern, you can interrupt it by lowering your volume, simplifying your message, or explicitly stating that you need a pause. Saying something brief and composed like, "let's take a moment and come back to this," halts the momentum and allows both parties to return with clearer heads. Intervening early prevents small sparks from turning into prolonged conflagrations and preserves the relationship's functional parts. Practice translating irritation into targeted requests that change the conditions creating the irritation. Anger is often a signal that something in your environment is misaligned with your needs. Instead of venting, turn the energy toward a specific fix, ask for a deadline adjustment, request clearer communication, or propose a different meeting structure. Concrete requests convert emotional heat into practical negotiation and make it easier to resolve the underlying issue rather than merely expressing displeasure. Cultivate the discipline of speaking less when the temptation to say something sharp is strong. Silence can be strategic and eloquent. When you refrain from rapid-fire responses, you deny the interaction fuel, and often the other person's intensity de-escalates in the absence of reciprocal aggression. Use silence to gather information, allow emotions to settle, and craft a response that advances your aims rather than satisfying a momentary urge for vindication. Expand your skill at short, corrective interventions that preserve dignity for everyone involved. The most effective corrections are brief, factual, and forward-looking. Note the behavior, describe the impact, and offer a clear next step. This approach prevents defensiveness and models the communication you want to receive. When these corrections are delivered calmly and consistently, patterns begin to shift and triggers lose their frequency and potency. Practice compassionate boundary enforcement. Hold firm to limits while acknowledging the other person's humanity. It is possible to be resolute about your needs without demeaning the other person. Say what you need with steadiness and brevity, and avoid piling on moral judgment. This style of enforcement reduces drama, makes it easier for others to comply, and protects your energy in the long term. Build a repertoire of short mental reframes to reduce the sting of personal slights. For instance, when someone cuts you off or speaks dismissively, reframe it as their moment of distraction rather than a reflection on your value. When someone misses a deadline, reframe it as a constraint they're managing rather than an intentional slight. These reframes are not denial, they are pragmatic tools that keep your reactions proportional and help you decide whether to act, forgive, or disengage. Make space for ritual repair after tense exchanges. A brief follow-up message that acknowledges friction and states a simple next step often short-circuits resentment. For example, a sentence that says you value the relationship and would like to revisit the subject later with clearer aims can prevent a single conflict from hardening into an ongoing grievance. Ritual repair demonstrates responsibility and reduces the cognitive load of unresolved irritation. Practice noticing the hidden wins in calm responses. When you choose a composed intervention, take a mental note of the positive outcomes. The other person listened, the disagreement ended more quickly, or you retained a sense of control. Collecting these micro-wins trains your brain to prefer composure because it remembers that calm produces better results. Reinforce those memories by briefly journaling or mentally logging the day's successful de-escalations. Train sustained presence during prolonged friction. Long disputes are draining not because of intensity alone but because they erode your attention. Practice techniques that renew presence amid extended conversations, slow your breathing, briefly ground your senses, and restate the core intent of the discussion. Maintaining presence prevents emotional drift into rumination and ensures your contributions remain purposeful rather than reactive. Practice converting indignation into creative problem solving. When you feel righteously incensed, pivot immediately to a question that generates options. What could we change to prevent this next time? Asking solution-focused questions channels adrenaline into constructive pathways and moves the dynamic from accusation to agency. This practice makes you a magnet for progress rather than conflict. Use periodic reality checks with trusted peers to recalibrate your sense of what warrants strong reaction. Asking a neutral friend or mentor for perspective on recurring triggers helps you detect cognitive distortions and confirm which issues truly merit work. Outside perspectives often reveal whether you're over-indexing on minor slights or missing structural problems that require decisive action. Be intentional about the stories you tell yourself about people who matter to you. If you repeatedly interpret a partner's, colleagues', or friends' lapses as proof of fundamental bad character, you're building a narrative that perpetually primes you for anger. Replace catastrophic narratives with gentler, evidence-based ones. Recognize patterns without inflating isolated incidents into personal trait assessments. This change softens the emotional trigger and clarifies whether the relationship is reparable. Practice letting go of small injustices quickly by using a short ritual of symbolic release. It could be a private line you say aloud, a brief breath series, or a small physical gesture that signals the end of the grievance. The ritual does not negate the issue. It marks your decision to conserve energy for what truly matters. Over time, these mini-releases reduce the accumulation of petty resentments that otherwise weigh on your mood. Cultivate a steady orientation toward long-term outcomes rather than short-term emotional victories. Winning an argument in the moment often costs relational capital and clarity. Ask yourself whether winning will advance your goals or merely satisfy a transient need for vindication. Prioritizing durable outcomes over immediate triumphs shifts your behavior toward strategies that preserve influence and respect. Practice humility about your own interpretive power. Recognize that your reading of another person's motives is often provisional and incomplete. Treat your interpretations as hypotheses to be tested rather than facts to be defended. This epistemic humility reduces righteous certainty, which is a major fuel for anger, and invites more collaborative exploration of intentions and impacts. Create a short list of quick restorative actions you can take after intense exchanges: a clarifying email, a walk, a 1-minute breathing practice, or a brief conversation to align next steps. These actions prevent aftermath rumination and convert emotional residue into landscape alterations that make future interactions smoother. Develop the discipline of small, frequent check-ins in important relationships. Regular, low-stakes conversations about what's working and what's not prevent grievances from building into explosive episodes. When feedback is routine and practical, complaints become part of normal maintenance rather than emergencies that trigger outsized reactions. Practice radical transparency about small needs in a calm, useful way. When you clearly express a need early, about time, tone, or logistics, you reduce ambiguity that later becomes a trigger. State the need succinctly and without accusation so the other person can respond helpfully rather than defensively. Finally, be patient with the uneven progress of this work. Emotional composure improves in fits and starts. Sometimes you'll handle a provocation gracefully, and other times you'll falter. Use those falters as data rather than proof of failure. What changed in context, energy, or expectation that made the old reflex win? Refine your tools, practice the small rituals that work, and keep moving forward. Over time, the accumulation of small, repeated choices in favor of curiosity, pause, and targeted action will reshape how you respond to people and circumstances, giving you more clarity, influence, and calm. If you want, I can produce a set of concise, punchy one-liners and short audio-ready cues that you can paste directly into your voiceover generator to increase engagement and watch time on your YouTube videos. Momentum audiobook-style cues fit particularly well as repeated anchors that help listeners internalize these habits. Deepen your skill at noticing how small cognitive habits amplify annoyance. Often, the mind runs on autopilot, replaying interpretations that inflate the emotional temperature. When you catch yourself elaborating a negative story about someone's behavior, pause and ask whether the evidence truly supports that narrative. More often than not, the story is a construction, a habit of interpretation rather than a clear reflection of reality. By consistently testing stories against facts, you shrink their emotional power. The practice is simple: observe the thought, state the concrete fact, and then choose a neutral frame that fits the evidence. Over time, this habit reduces the frequency and intensity of angry spikes. Work on translating contempt into boundary work. Contempt is one of the most corrosive interpersonal emotions because it mixes moral disdain with personal dismissal. When you notice contempt arising, take it as a cue to clarify the practical changes you need rather than to stew. Ask yourself what specific behavior triggered the contempt and what clear, calm request would address it. Make the request brief, state the impact succinctly, and set the expectation for change. Contempt loses its energy when converted into precise action steps that protect your dignity. Practice micro-forgiveness as a daily discipline. Instead of saving forgiveness for large transgressions, use it as a frequent, lightweight tool. When someone irritates you in a minor way, silently grant them a small, private pardon that removes the moment from your mental ledger. This does not mean ignoring patterns that matter, it means preventing tiny slights from accumulating into a heavy, chronic mood. Micro-forgiveness is a practical technique for preserving mental bandwidth and preventing a cascade of resentments. Strengthen your habit of clear post-conflict logistics. After a disagreement, even a brief sentence that outlines next steps can prevent rekindling. Specify who will do what, by when, and how you will check back. Clarity about logistics converts emotional residue into practical coordination and reduces the chances that unresolved ambivalence will fester into renewed irritation. This simple shift turns conflict into a manageable project rather than an unresolved wound. Train yourself to notice how scarcity thinking fuels irritation. When you believe your time, attention, or emotional energy is limited and under threat, small requests or slights feel like attacks. Counter this by reframing abundance where possible. You have choices about your engagement, resources to draw on, and ways to reallocate attention. Reminding yourself of the options available in a tense moment reduces the sense of siege and makes composed responses more likely. Practice speaking from the middle voice. Avoid framing statements as absolute judgments or personal indictments. Instead, use phrasing that centers the observed behavior and your experience of it. This voice makes it easier for others to hear you without becoming defensive and helps you maintain composure. When you speak from the middle, your tone naturally stabilizes and your words become instruments for problem solving rather than triggers for escalation. Use short, ritualized resets after recurring stressors. Identify a predictable friction point in your day and create a 2-minute practice to reset afterward. Step outside for fresh air, do 3 slow breaths, or write a single sentence about what you learned. These ritualized resets prevent the day's friction from collecting into a heavier mood and keep your baseline calmer across repeated encounters. Repetition makes the reset automatic and preserves energy for creative tasks rather than for reactivity. Build the muscle of timely, proportionate feedback. When someone's action genuinely warrants correction, deliver feedback sooner rather than later, but keep it short, specific, and focused on the behavior. Timely feedback reduces the accumulation of resentment and gives the other person a fair chance to correct course. Delivering feedback in a measured way also preserves your credibility and makes it more likely that your concerns will be taken seriously. Develop techniques for managing public criticism. When critique comes in public, the initial rush of shame and anger can be intense. Practice a 2-step response. Acknowledge receipt of the comment briefly, then request a private follow-up to address it in detail. This approach preserves dignity, prevents escalation in front of others, and creates a setting where constructive problem-solving is more likely. Managing public critique with composure protects both your reputation and your equanimity. Practice selective empathy in heated moments. Instead of trying to fully understand every perspective during a spike of emotion, choose one plausible, benign motive to consider first. This immediate act of charitable thinking reduces hostility and opens a path to inquiry. Once the moment has cooled, you can engage in deeper empathic exploration if needed. The short-term benefit is a lower likelihood of escalation and a clearer channel for productive conversation. Cultivate structural changes that reduce triggers over time. If certain contexts repeatedly cause friction, examine how you can alter those structures, change meeting formats, adjust handoff protocols, or clarify role responsibilities. Small systemic fixes often have outsized effects on interpersonal temperature because they remove recurring sources of frustration rather than relying solely on willpower in the moment. Practice reframing difficult people as messy humans rather than antagonists. This subtle mental shift softens automatic hostility and makes it easier to choose constructive responses. When you see a person's difficult behavior as part of their complexity rather than as a deliberate assault on you, you can engage from a place of pragmatic curiosity, what's driving this, and what can be changed, rather than reactive disdain. Use concise, practiced lines to redirect conversations that become personal. Having a short, neutral phrase ready, one that signals you want to move from accusation to problem solving, reduces the chances of a fight continuing. Deliver the line calmly, restate the desired outcome, and bring the focus back to the problem rather than to personalities. These small redirections keep exchanges productive and protect your energy. Work on dissociating the need for immediate moral victory from your responses. Many arguments are sustained by the need to be morally right in the moment. Recognize that being right now is rarely worth the relational cost later. Hold firm to your values but choose strategies that secure long-term influence, ask questions, propose solutions, and preserve dignity for everyone involved. Practice breathing patterns that are tailored for rapid downregulation. A slow, extended exhale engages the parasympathetic nervous system and reduces arousal quickly. Practice this breath pattern in neutral moments so it becomes automatic when needed. Combining this physiological tool with a brief cognitive reframe enhances your ability to return quickly to composure. Create a practice of contextualizing insults as out-of-context data points. Often people say harsh things in moments of fatigue, stress, or projection. Treat an insult as a single data point to be tested rather than as a definitive truth. Ask what else you know about the person, the situation, and their recent pressures. Contextualization reduces the solidity of the insult and prevents it from lodging as a lasting grievance. Finally, keep a pragmatic orientation toward progress. The goal is gradual improvement through consistent, small choices, a pause here, a clear boundary there, a micro-forgiveness now. Track your small successes, refine what works, and allow yourself room to err without catastrophizing. Over time, these cumulative changes reshape your default response pattern so that you act from purpose rather than from reactive habit. Momentum Audiobook style reminders can be effective prompts during this process because they repeat short, calm directives that reinforce new habits. If you want, I can prepare concise audio-ready cues that echo the key practices in this part and are optimized for listener engagement and watch time. Keep sharpening your ability to pause by turning everyday interruptions into deliberate practice sessions. When someone says something that pricks you, treat it as if you were training a muscle, notice the impulse to react, breathe slowly, and choose a response that aligns with the outcome you want rather than with the immediate heat of the moment. Repetition matters more than intensity. Short, frequent exercises of restraint build a durable capacity to stay composed when a genuinely provocative situation arises. Over time, what once felt like a heroic effort becomes ordinary, and your calmer responses require progressively less conscious effort. Work on the mental distinction between responsibility and ownership. Responsibility means you respond skillfully to what you can influence, ownership means you accept blame for things beyond your control. When someone's behavior lights your fuse, ask whether the issue is something you are responsible for changing or merely something you are being affected by. If it is the latter, resist the urge to take it on personally. This boundary between influence and intrusion preserves your energy for areas where you can actually make a difference and reduces the emotional drag of feeling burdened by others' choices. Practice converting negative forecasts into experimental questions. When your mind predicts that a conflict will escalate or that a person will never change, reframe that forecast as a testable hypothesis. What would happen if I asked this question, or requested this small change? Approaching interpersonal dilemmas as experiments reduces the certainty that fuels anger and replaces it with curiosity about outcomes. This scientific stance naturally lowers emotional arousal and increases the probability that you will discover workable solutions. Deepen your skill at detecting moralization in your thinking. Moralization occurs when you interpret an ordinary lapse as a fundamental ethical violation and react as though a cosmic wrong has occurred. When you notice moral language inside your head, words like always, never, or evil, pause and translate the thought into neutral terms about behavior and consequences. This translation reduces the moral heat and returns you to practical responses that solve problems rather than inflating them into identity wars. Hone the practice of strategic vulnerability. There are moments when a brief, calm admission of your own discomfort disarms tension and invites cooperation. Saying something like, "I'm feeling unsettled by that remark," in a steady, non-accusatory tone can shift a defensive exchange into a collaborative one. The key is brevity and clarity, vulnerability used as a tool for connection, not as an invitation for prolonged self-justification. Practice this way, vulnerability becomes a lever for de-escalation and honest repair. Train yourself to notice the functional purpose of anger when it appears. Anger often signals that a boundary has been crossed or a need has been denied. Instead of acting on the intensity, translate the signal into a concrete request. What do I need changed in this situation to feel respected? When you convert motive into a specific ask, you reclaim agency and reduce the likelihood that your reaction will simply escalate the conflict. This translation process transforms anger from a reactive hazard into a pragmatic prompt for change. Work on developing compact communication rituals that you can deploy in high-heat situations. For instance, a short, pre-rehearsed line that states the behavior, the impact, and the desired change in one sentence provides clarity without drama. Because the phrasing is practiced, it can be delivered smoothly even when tension is present. These compact rituals make it easier for the other person to understand the issue without feeling attacked and increase the chance of a cooperative response. Practice reframing power dynamics in your mind. When you feel provoked by someone who seems to hold power or who uses aggression to dominate, remind yourself of the levers you do possess, your choices about presence, tone, timing, and follow-up. Reclaiming these smaller forms of power reduces the desperation to win in the moment and enables you to act with greater strategic intelligence. This stance is not about submission, it is about choosing influence methods that preserve relationships and produce sustainable change. Cultivate a daily habit of noticing small acts of kindness and competence in people who sometimes irritate you. Intentionally balancing each perceived slight with at least one observed positive action prevents your mind from building a one-sided narrative of bad character. This practice is not about excusing harmful behavior but about maintaining an accurate, proportionate view of people that prevents minor offenses from ballooning into wholesale condemnation. Refine your ability to distinguish between corrective feedback and personal attack. When receiving criticism, ask yourself whether the content is actionable and relevant to a goal you care about. If it is, receive it as a gift and plan a concise response or revision. If it is personal and non-constructive, protect your boundaries and disengage. Building this discrimination reduces needless defensive anger and channels your energy into improvements that actually matter. Practice the simple discipline of reducing mental escalation by limiting time spent rehearsing past interactions. It is natural to replay difficult moments, but extended rumination strengthens neural patterns that make future reactivity more likely. Set a small, clear rule for yourself, 5 minutes of reflection per issue, and then shift attention to a constructive next step. This containment preserves cognitive resources and prevents past events from contaminating your present mood. Develop strategies for dealing with chronic friction in recurring relationships. When a pattern repeatedly irritates you, address it with a short, scheduled conversation that focuses on specific behaviors and logistics rather than airing a catalog of grievances. Create a simple plan that changes the recurring conditions, different responsibilities, altered routines, or clarified expectations, and test the change for a fixed period. Systemic adjustments often reduce triggers more effectively than repeated emotional labor. Train your nervous system with short physical resets that are easy to deploy in public. A discreet shoulder roll, a slow sip of water, or a brief shift in posture changes the embodied experience of stress and reduces reactivity. These tiny physical cues, repeated often, become go-to tools that interrupt adrenaline-driven impulses and give your prefrontal cortex time to re-engage with reasoned choices. Work on reducing entitlement scripts that fuel annoyance. Entitlement shows up when you unconsciously believe you are owed particular treatment or consideration. Notice when you feel indignant because things did not go your way, and replace the narrative of entitlement with one of preference and negotiation. I would prefer X. Can we discuss it? This small linguistic shift moves you from righteous fury to practical dialogue. Practice cultivating mental spaciousness with brief pauses between decisions. When you feel the urge to strike back, impose a short cooling interval, count to 10, breathe slowly, or step out of the room. These pauses expand the decision window and allow you to choose strategically rather than reflexively. In many cases, the pause itself reduces the urge to retaliate and opens the door to a more effective response. Refine your approach to apology and repair. When you do overreact or say something sharp, make the repair straightforward, acknowledge the harm, apologize briefly, and state what you will do differently. Avoid long rationalizations that recenter your pain, keep the repair focused on restoring trust and preventing recurrence. Clean, timely repairs reduce the emotional charge and help relationships recover faster. Practice noticing the difference between action-worthy anger and passing irritation. Action-worthy anger points to a pattern or structural issue that requires change, passing irritation is often modal and short-lived. Before mobilizing your energy, evaluate whether the issue meets criteria for sustained attention. This triage helps you conserve your emotional bandwidth for problems that matter and prevents chronic agitation over daily inconveniences. Train your attention to the interplay of sleep, nutrition, and stress on your reactivity. When you are underrested, underfed, or overloaded, small provocations loom larger and your capacity for regulation shrinks. Build basic routines that protect your baseline, consistent sleep windows, regular meals, and micro breaks, and treat them as essential prep work for interpersonal resilience. Practice choosing retention over reaction in public spaces. When confronted in an audience or in a public forum, favor short, composed responses that preserve your reputation and leave room for private follow-up. Public restraint often communicates confidence and control, and it prevents emotionally charged replies from creating additional complications that are difficult to repair. Finally, integrate all these elements into a simple, personal credo that you can repeat in tense moments: notice, breathe, choose, and act. Keep the credo brief and test it in low-stakes situations until it becomes second nature. The power of a compact, practiced mental rule is that it reduces decision friction when you most need clarity. Over time, the credo and the small practices that support it will lower the baseline frequency of provocation, increase your influence in difficult conversations, and leave you freer to focus on work and relationships that matter. If you would like, I can produce concise audio-ready cues built around the credo and other key one-liners, formatted for direct pasting into your voiceover generator to increase engagement and watch time for your YouTube content. Momentum Audiobook style anchors work particularly well as repeated, calm prompts to reinforce these habits. Bring all the skills you've practiced together into a practical maintenance routine that keeps composure as your default. Begin each day with a 2-minute centering ritual that reminds you of the simple habits that matter. Notice your breath, state a single behavioral intention for the day, and affirm a short credo you can recall under stress. This daily priming is not about perfection, it is about creating a steady reference point so your nervous system starts the day with a mild advantage. When small provocations occur, that early investment reduces the likelihood that you slide immediately into old reactive patterns. Create a short, repeatable phrase that captures your overall approach and use it as an on-the-spot cue when tension rises. The phrase should be compact enough to fit in the mind quickly but meaningful enough to shift your behavior: notice, breathe, choose, act. Practice it in neutral moments until it feels automatic. When you need to interrupt a spike of anger, quietly repeating this line resets attention and triggers the micro-habits you have rehearsed, labeling the sensation, taking an extended exhale, and choosing the next move that aligns with your long-term aims rather than the immediate impulse. Develop a simple weekly review ritual that converts experience into improvement. Spend 10 minutes each week noting the triggers you encountered, the responses you tried, and what worked or failed. Identify one small adjustment to practice during the coming week and make a plan for when you will rehearse it. This iterative learning process turns occasional moments of composure into durable skill because it focuses attention on growth rather than on blame. Over time, the weekly practice creates a visible map of progress that reinforces your confidence and reduces the shame that keeps people stuck. Design a short repertoire of calibrated responses for the relationships that matter most. For family members, partners, and close colleagues, craft concise, respectful statements that you can use when boundaries are crossed. For example, a brief observation of the fact, a one-sentence description of the impact, and a clear request for change delivered in a calm tone will often be more effective than a long defensive monologue. Rehearse these lines until they are available under pressure, and commit to immediate, simple repairs when you slip so that trust remains intact and resentments do not compound. Keep refining environmental changes that support lower reactivity. Adjust meeting formats, change notification settings, schedule regular recovery breaks, and reduce exposure to sensational media. External design choices matter as much as internal practices because they shape the frequency and intensity of triggers you encounter. By altering the structures that feed irritation, you reduce the need to exercise willpower constantly and make composed behavior more sustainable. Use targeted experiments to expand what you can tolerate without losing composure. Intentionally place yourself in mildly challenging situations and test different responses, a measured inquiry instead of a retort, a brief pause instead of an immediate text, or a graceful exit instead of a prolonged argument. Treat each experiment as information gathering. Record what happens and refine the response. This experimental stance reduces the pressure to be perfect and accelerates learning by emphasizing results over moralizing about your reactions. Consolidate your identity around the type of person you want to be by repeatedly acting in small ways that embody that identity. If your chosen identity is someone who communicates calmly and sets clear boundaries, then choose a few micro-behaviors that express that identity and do them daily: a steady tone, a brief boundary statement when appropriate, and a rapid repair when you err. Identity shifts are reinforced by repeated, ordinary actions rather than by single dramatic efforts. Over months, these small acts reshape how you see yourself and how others expect you to behave, which in turn makes composed behavior easier and more automatic. Keep compassion and firmness in balance by practicing both in the same breath. When someone upsets you, acknowledge their humanity without excusing harmful patterns. State the behavior and its impact calmly, offer a possibility for repair, and hold a clear boundary about what will change next. This combination protects your dignity and models the kind of interaction you want while avoiding the costly cycle of reactive escalation. Finally, make reinforcement part of your media and content strategy if you intend to share these skills publicly. Short, repeatable cues and concise scripts work well in audio formats because they can be replayed and internalized. Consider using calm, steady reminders similar to the voice and pacing found in Momentum audiobooks to increase listener retention and watch time. Small anchors repeated across episodes or videos create familiarity and help listeners practice the skills between sessions, turning passive listening into active habit formation. When you look back at the work you have done, notice that the shift from being easily provoked to being composed is not dramatic or magical. It is the accumulation of many small, intentional choices: a breath taken instead of a retort, a brief boundary stated instead of simmering silently, a quick repair instead of a protracted argument. These choices compound. Each one slightly lowers the baseline reactivity and increases the space you have to act from purpose rather than from impulse. Keep your toolkit simple, practice the core rituals consistently, and treat slip-ups as data rather than defeat. With steady application, composure becomes not a tight rule you impose on yourself but the easiest, most natural way you operate.